Hi guys, this is Mark. In this lecture, we are talking about loops and how to use them in codeless programming. What is a loop? It is a special construct that allows you to execute certain logic. Could be complex, could be simple, doesn't really matter. Think about it as just a single step of that loop. And that logic is executed multiple times. How many times? It really depends. You could have a loop that has fixed number of iterations. You could say that you need to execute something 10 times. It could be a loop that is executed for a collection. And in that case, for every item in a collection, you're executing certain logic where you check something, do something. It doesn't really matter. It's completely up to you. You could have a loop that is executed until certain conditions are met. And in this case, you continue executing the same logic over and over and over. Something changes, and then you decide, okay, well, now it's time to break out of that loop. In Codeless, we support 4 different types of loops, and you will see once we jump into our practical exercise, you will see what they are. So loops are very important. For this demo, for this exercise, we will be using the same page that we built for collections, where we were adding apples, oranges, bananas, and so on, and we could visualize that collection. So you will need to create a replica, a copy of that page, and we will start exploring loops in there. So to continue, let's just jump right into UI Builder and start playing with the loops. The starting point in UI Builder will be the collections page that we created in the previous lecture. And to continue, what I recommend is creating a copy of this page. And to do this, move the mouse over this area where it says Editing Page, click the New Page button. In the Create As, select Fork and select your collections page, whatever it is called. In my case, it is called collections page, and create a page called loops. The page now is created, and here's what we're going to do. We will populate our collection with some values, and for the demonstration purposes, I propose that we populate this list, that collection, with items that are just numbers. And we will create a loop that will filter out all even or odd numbers. Since we don't want to re-enter every time we run this page the actual values, let's initialize this input right here with some hard-coded values. To do this, select the page and click the Logic button. And in here, what we will need to do is, rather than modifying my list, we will initialize the item property, and rather than creating empty list, what we will put in here is a string that contains numbers from 1 to 20 separated by comma. Just like this. What will happen is the page will start, and in the item property of the page data, this string will appear. Since this input has data binding for the item property, you will see that string immediately show up in this input. And when we click Add to List, we will need to process that string, split it up, and create the actual collection. So let's add logic for that. So in here, the previous logic was to add one item to the list. In our case, we don't need to do that. Instead, what we will do is this. Let's move it out and go to Object, set property in. The property will be in page data called myList. And the value, we will create a list by parsing that string. Use this block and we will make list from text, and our text comes from the item property in page data, the one that we just initialized. There you go. So what this will do is it will take that string that we populated into input component. We will process that string and we'll make a list from that text where the delimiter is comma. And that will go directly into the my list. And we could use this block just to reset the value of the input component. Or we may not need to do that, because if we need to modify, we can just quickly modify what's in there and then reinitialize our list. So everything can be deleted. And let's go back to the interface. We can get rid of this input, which is not needed. We will not be removing. And remove item can be renamed to remove odd items. Let's not worry about this yet. If we run our page, you will see that everything works, although there will be an undesired effect because all these items will just continue in this block, pushing everything out to the right. Let's see how it works, and then we will make the change just so it is rendered properly. So there you go. We have these numbers, and if we click the button, you see what happens. They're being added in a single row, and everything gets pushed out. Let's make the change where it basically rolls over to the next line when it reaches the end. To do this, select the main work area that contains all our components and change the dimension to be 100%. Notice that the log area got pushed out. To fix this, locate flex shrink for the main area and set it to 1. And flex shrink is one of those properties that controls of how the components get positioned when there is not enough real estate, when everything needs to stay within these boundaries. Also select the block that contains our circles. And in here, you will see the flex wrap option and select wrap. And the width could also be set to 100%. So with these changes, let's rerun the page. Click Add to List. And as you can see now, it is nicely wraps to the next line. In fact, since we do not clear out this field, this input string, if you were to add some numbers, and they don't need to be in the same order, you could, for this reason, add any number you want, but make sure to keep it as numbers because that will be important. So click Add to List and just continues adding them. Good. So now we have this list with all of these values in there. And to demonstrate loops, what I would like to do is to go over every single item in that list, find the ones that are odd, and remove them from this list, and be able to visualize it as we click this button. And that will give you an idea for how loops work. So now we got pretty close to actual having the setup that contains everything that we need in order to start exploring loops. So click this button, remove odd items, and go to logic. And in here, you can just completely delete this, what we had in there. So loops. Loops are available under system, and there is a loops section. So click on that, and these are the blocks that support loops in Codeless. Remember when I said that there are 4 different types of loops, and then for each type, there is a special block that supports that. So let's review them real quick. The first one, repeat, and then you can specify how many times. This is a loop that contains fixed number of iterations. So any logic that you place inside is going to be a single iteration, and you can control how many times it is repeated. Since this is a block, that could come in, that value could come in through a variable, could be something that just comes from elsewhere in your application. This one will be repeated while certain logic is true. So as you can see, there is a little connector here next to while. So while that logic is true, that will be repeated over and over. And by the way, instead of while, you can use until, which becomes fairly self-explanatory. Delete that, we do not need it. This one will create a loop where a variable goes from specific value to some other specific value, and every time that loop executes, a single iteration executes, then it's going to be incremented by that value. So with the defaults, it's going to go from 1 to 10 times, where every single time variable I is going to be incremented by 1. So the starting value will be 1, then after that 2, until it gets to 10. And finally, this loop will iterate over every single item in a collection. As you can see, you can attach your connection right here on this connector. And variable j, in this case, and you can rename this variable to anything you want to, will be becoming a value from that collection. So if we were to connect our collection of those numbers that we have on the screen, And for the very first one, j will be value 1. For the next one, value 2, and so on. So whatever the values in your collection are, variable j will have that value. In fact, we will be using this type of loop in our example. And then the break out of loop block allows you to get out of that loop prematurely. So if some other logic happens that where you need to stop processing of that loop, then you can use break out of loop block. So for now, let's use this guy right here and connect it to the onClick event. We need to get our list, and our list is available through data binding. So if we go to get property from page data, and the property name is my list, because this is where our list is stored. So now variable j is going to contain a specific number starting from the very first position all the way to the very last position that we can check whether it's odd or even. So in here, since we need to do the check, let's go to logic and add the if block. And in the if block, we need to check if variable j is odd. And to check this, go to math, and in here you'll see the block of checking whether a number is even or odd. So connect it to the if statement and change it to odd. By the way, you see there's a bunch of other checks you can check whether it's even, odd, prime, whole, all kinds of checks that are built right into Codeless. So we're going to be checking if that number is odd. But we don't want to check 0, which doesn't make sense. We want to check the value that is in j. So go to variables, select this j, and drag it right in here. So in here, what's going to happen that if j is odd, and we want to get rid of that value from our collection. And to do this, if we go to lists and scroll to the very bottom, you will see that there is a block to remove an item from the collection. The collection that we want to remove from is going to be this my list. So you can make a copy of this block, put it in here, and the item we want to remove is going to be item j. And let's ignore the comparator because we don't really care about that. This becomes kind of long. Let's change it to external inputs, and now it becomes a lot more compact. That's all the logic that we need, because the rest will happen automatically. We're modifying our list, we're removing items as we go, and that list will be re-rendered in the UI, and then of course in memory it will also be modified. So let's just review what we have. The button is clicked, we're starting a loop where we go over every single item in our list. For every single item we perform an if check, and we check if that item is odd. If it is true, then we get inside of this if, and in here we're getting this list and we're removing that item from the list. Something that will happen here over and over and over is this get property from page data will be executed every single time for every single item in that list. So if we have 20, 30, 100 items, we will be getting it 100 times. So what would make more sense is to actually create a variable and call it list. You can call it anything you want. And what we will do is we'll assign this list to this variable, and we will use this list from the variable right here, and same thing just like that. So now we get this list of only one time, and then we're going over and reusing that list variable. That's all the logic we need to have in place, and let's just see how well that works. So let's populate this list. We have all these numbers, and let's remove odd items. There you go. So now we have only even numbers in that list. All the odd items were removed by using that loop. So now if you add some other values, of course the list will be pre-populated. And if you click this, it's going to do the same filtering one more time. Very easy to use. And here, as you can see, this is the power of our loop to go over every single item in the collection and perform some logic. That's all for now, guys, because I think for everything else it's going to be exactly the same principle. You just apply the right loop that makes more sense for the logic of your application, and just add the logic inside of that loop iteration. I hope it answers the question of what loops are and how to use them in Codeless. Thank you for watching this video, and as always, happy Codeless coding.